This is Doug DeMuro, and today I'm going to talk about how I drove my brand new 2024 Toyota Sequoia TRD Pro 3,300 miles across the country in 4 days. It is a big deal, a big drive, and I'm going to tell you exactly how the Sequoia did. Let's discuss. Today's video is sponsored by Cars and Bids, which is my online car auction website for modern enthusiast cars. Cars and Bids has around 600,000 registered users, all excited to bid on and buy special cars like this and this and this and this. So, if you're looking to sell your enthusiast car, do it on Cars and Bids and reach a huge audience. Okay, so my Sequoia TRD Pro. I bought a brand new 2024 Sequoia TRD Pro back in March. And a couple of weeks ago, I drove it from San Diego, California, the very corner of the country right here, all the way to Massachusetts, the other very corner of the country right here. It's about 3,200 miles one way, as I do every summer. And in the fall, I will drive back from Massachusetts to San Diego, 3,200 miles in the other direction. Now, this is an important thing to talk about for a couple reasons. Number one, because the Sequoia is brand new, the brand new car in heavy demand. They're very difficult to find at dealerships, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who are curious what I thought of the experience. It was also a big deal for me personally because I'm not a big SUV guy. And so in the 3 months that I had owned the Sequoia, after I bought it, I drove it 450 miles. So I was on pace for like 1,200 miles a year. I was not using it, and I don't really plan to. And then I drove it 3,300 miles in 4 days. So 3 months, I drove it 450 miles. 4 days, I drove it 3,300 miles. So needless to say, I've gotten an enormous amount of experience in the Sequoia TRD Pro. And it worked great. There were no issues or problems or breakdowns or mechanical or anything like that. It worked fine, but obviously I have some positive things to say about it and some negative things to say about it, as one would, having gotten so acquainted with a vehicle, so intimately acquainted with a vehicle over a relatively short period of time, driving it a lot of miles. So I'm going to start by talking about what I liked, and then I'm going to get into what I did not like, and then some just sort of general thoughts about the Sequoia and about my driving trip across the country. And by the way, if you're curious, the reason I do this trip in the summer, I live here in the East Coast in Massachusetts. In the rest of the year, I live in California, and it just makes the most sense to drive 3,300 miles across the country. Believe me, I have thought of every other possibility, and this is the way it's done. So, what did I like about the Sequoia experience? Number one, first and foremost thing that I liked the best about the driving the Sequoia across the country, the driver assist technology. Driver assist is basically the car's ability to slow down and speed up automatically based on the car in front of you and its self-steering capabilities. The Sequoia has what I think most people would classify as an okay system. However, for my particular needs, it is a fantastic system. In the sense that I don't need the system to change lanes for me. I don't really care about that. I've never really understood why people care about that. I can change lanes on my own. The Sequoia system does not change lanes for you. Some people would not buy it for that reason. Me, didn't care. The two things the Sequoia does really, really well. Number one, it follows a lane, and all you need to do is have your hand resting on the steering wheel. It has what's called a capacitive touch steering wheel, which means that you don't have to jiggle the steering wheel every 30 seconds to let it know that you're paying attention. This is, to me, the biggest drawback with Tesla. Tesla people are always like, oh, I have the greatest self-driving system. It works so well. But you have to tell it every like 30 or 40 seconds, I'm here, by jiggling the wheel. In the Sequoia, and in a lot of other cars, honestly, all you have to do is put your hand on the wheel, and you can leave it there permanently. And as long as the car can sense that your skin is touching the steering wheel, you're good. It doesn't require a jiggle. It doesn't require you to confirm that you're paying attention. So you can sit there like this for a long time. You can sit there like this for Oklahoma if you want to. And just sort of have your hand just on a corner of the wheel. It senses you're there, and you and Sequoia do your own thing. It also does a really good job of keeping the lane, especially in these rural interstates where they don't have tight turns. Like I don't know that this system would work well in roads and streets around your city or town. But on wide open highways where I did a huge drive, this is a really good system, works really well. The other big thing, the number 2 big thing that the Sequoia system does well is stops and starts are really smooth. This was the biggest problem I had with my Land Rover Defender. I had a new Land Rover Defender, and when a car would like gradually slow down in front of you, the Defender would like get right up on its bumper and then slam on the brakes, and it clearly hadn't been calibrated all that well. They had the feature, they could advertise that they had the feature, but it was not good. And in the Toyota, it's good. And in fact, it's smoother than it is in my brand new Mercedes station wagon, which is my other daily driver car. And so I find that to be kind of interesting. Like the Toyota has actually a better capacitive touch wheel, and it has a better speed up, slow down thing for driver assist braking and accelerating. So with that in mind, that was a really great feature because 3,300 miles across the country, as you can imagine, setting cruise control and just kind of letting the car do its thing is really good. And it's especially good for me. I don't have the best knees. I don't like to sit there in kind of the knee lock position with my foot on the accelerator. You can kind of stretch out a little in the footwell and have the car kind of do its thing over long, long rural stretches. Okay, number 2 thing that I really liked about driving the Sequoia across the country, the powertrain. My Sequoia has a twin turbocharged hybrid V6 with about 440 horsepower and like 500 pound-feet of torque, something like that. It is amazing. It is an amazing powertrain. And since it has come out, all of the Toyota people on the internet, all of the anonymous internet Toyota people are like, that's not as good as my V8. They don't like it as much as they like the old V8. Well, I'm happy to report I owned the old V8. I had a Land Cruiser with the old 5.7 liter V8, which was the previous V8 in the previous Sequoia and Tundra and Land Cruiser. And the V8 wasn't as good. I mean, there's a few reasons. Number 1, this engine has more power, more torque, and better acceleration, so there's that. It's also smoother, and frankly, I find the low-end acceleration to be better, which is more important for 95% of driving, like accelerating away from a stoplight or a stop sign. It just feels burlier with the V6 than it did with the V8. The other benefit, though, honestly, is reliability. Everybody's like, that V6 gonna blow up. It don't blow up. And Toyota has recalled a small portion of non-hybrid turbo V6s that were in the Tundra for the 22 model year because of some casting flaw. But they haven't expanded that recall to the hybrids, to the 23 models, or to any other vehicles. Maybe Sequoia is included as well. But regardless, it's a small portion of cars in the 22 year. Mine's a 24. Hasn't been recalled, and I haven't heard of any issues on 23s or 24s. Regardless, engines have growing pains when they first come out. I'm not particularly concerned about it. I just drove 3,300 miles, no problem. I had the old V8, and it had a lot of problems. And I've talked about these problems, and people get so angry when you talk about Land Cruisers having problems. No, they don't. It means you don't know how to own a Land Cruiser. And it's like, well, but if you go on the forums, you'll see the ignition's a problem, or the starter's a problem, the valley plate, the water pump. I mean, there's a lot of issues. People are the radiator fails. No, those aren't problems. You just fix them and then they're not problems. It's like, well, that's a problem then, isn't it? And I've had so many people come up to me privately and be like, I had a Land Cruiser and I had those problems too. And you're so right. But meanwhile, on the internet, there's this like lore about the old V8 Land Cruisers that they run forever. And I just don't buy it. I think the 5.7 Land Cruiser V8 is a good engine, but it's inefficient. It's kind of slow, to be totally honest. And it's not even really all that reliable. It's pretty maintenance intensive. And so the new powertrain is great. It really does a pretty good job of motivating the car. It feels good, it sounds good, and it just drives well. It's smooth. Other things I like, the camera system of the car is fantastic, top down, 360. I also love the fact that there is a button I can push that instantly pulls up the cameras, which is a great feature that all cars should have, especially big ones. You know, in a lot of big cars, you have to wait till you go into reverse for the cameras to come on. Not in this car. You push a button, the cameras all come on instantly, and it's really cool because you're trying to go front into a parking spot. There are all your cameras easily available to you, and that's great. Another thing I actually liked, believe it or not, about my Sequoia was interior space. This has been a big drawback and negative complaint that the new Sequoia has been getting. The interior is not big enough. Well, the car is 208 inches long. It is a behemoth. I have never owned a car this big before, not even close. And to me, it's huge inside. I'm not coming from a full-size SUV space, but I'm looking at this from a Volvo XC60, which is what we had before to replace it, going, this thing is massive. I can get everything in this car. And indeed, I brought a whole house full of stuff with me, plus my dog, and I still had 1.5 rows completely available for me and the dog. And if you look at the numbers on paper, the Sequoia is actually similar to other full-size SUVs. The Sequoia has 22.3 square feet of cargo space behind the third row, the Tahoe has 25.5, and the Expedition has 20.9. In other words, the Sequoia is right in between the Tahoe and the Expedition, which are the other gold standard full-size SUVs. The Sequoia is smaller with the seats folded down because they don't fold all the way flat in the Sequoia because the hybrid battery system is under there. But it's still like 90 cubic feet of cargo space with the seats folded flat. It's certainly more than enough for me. And so again, for my needs, for my use case, it's fine. Two other things I liked about the Sequoia. Number one, I am shocked to admit this, but I actually legitimately like how it looks. I've had to modify mine to get to that point. I removed the running boards, the side skirts, which I think are heinous. I took them off. I painted the wheels gray because I hate black wheels. And I took the giant Sequoia badge off the back. After I did that stuff, I actually think it kind of looks pretty nice. It has like the right level of muscle without being over the top. I do wish I could get rid of the camo fender flares, but other than that, I like how it looks. And more importantly, I love the off-road capability. That was a major, major thing buying this car that I needed to have. And I have it, and frankly, for a giant full-size SUV, it's never going to be as off-road capable as a Jeep Wrangler, but it's surprisingly capable given that it's essentially a minivan that I'm taking off-road. So, what did I not like about my Sequoia experience? What was not good? A few things that are worth mentioning. Number one, unquestionably, number one is the ride quality. People get these big SUVs and they're like, oh, they're so smooth, but the truth is they're truck-based. And if you're coming out of a very nice new Mercedes station wagon, which is my other daily driver car, like I said, that rides better. A truck-based SUV just bumps around. It just doesn't ride all that well. It rides fine for a highway trip. It's totally okay, but it's not that great. Now, for me, off-road capability was more important than ride quality. And so that was a trade-off I was willing to make, but it's also a trade-off I knew I was making. And again, this goes back to my use case. I'm cool with it. I don't know that everybody would be. If your plan is to just take your kids to school in suburban Texas, you don't need the ride to be this bad. You can have a nicer riding vehicle. Go get a Mercedes GLE. It's wonderful. Or an E450 all-terrain. But for me, and because I wanted all the off-road capability, I sacrificed ride quality, and you do feel that. It is bumpier, not as calm and composed as it could be. Fuel economy was the other big drawback. And again, I'm new to the full-size SUV space, but 18.5 miles per gallon is what I got in 3,300 miles across the country, and that's just not good. It's just bad fuel economy. I will say it was at 16.9 miles per gallon when I entered Tennessee, and that's important because 75 miles an hour is like the minimum, is like the speed limit from the California border to the Arkansas-Tennessee border, and so you can go 85, and I do, kind of without worry. And so it got 16.8, 16.9 miles per gallon in that stretch. Now, once you hit Tennessee, the speed limits drop, and 70 becomes the highest speed limit. And in some states in the New England, 65 is the highest speed limit. And so you really start to drop down your speed. And that's important because I was hitting high 16s until I got to the lower speed limit states, and then I ended at 18.5, which says to me that probably it was getting 21, 22 miles per gallon in order to counteract all those miles before at 16.5 and average at 18.5. And so I think if you were going like 70 on the freeway, you could probably get 23 miles per gallon, which isn't horrible in a full-size SUV, but to me, last year I did this trip in my Mercedes wagon. It got 32 miles per gallon. It's hard to go down to 18.5. So fuel economy for a big SUV is fine, but for me as a person, I'm not that into it. But it's just sort of the reality of what I had to do. It's important to keep in mind, I sold 2 cars to buy this one. And so the trade-off of having 2 vehicles, that's almost always going to be more inefficient than just one car. And so I'm cool with it. I'm also disappointed that the fuel tank is actually kind of small. So on these long highway trips, I was barely able to get 300 miles out of range. My Mercedes wagon would routinely do 400, 450 miles, and that's a big difference over a long trip. I calculated that the smaller fuel tank compared to the Mercedes probably cost me 40 minutes filling the car up additional times throughout driving across the country. And on long drives where, you're driving all day, 40 total minutes is a lot. It's the difference between maybe you getting in a little bit earlier and getting a little more sleep, and that's really not ideal. Two other complaints about the Sequoia. Number one, the stupid camo fenders and the camo interior drive me wild. It is so annoying to me that Toyota decided their clientele for this car was so the type of people who have camo accessories that they did that from the factory. I just think it looks so stupid. I do not decry the camo accessoried people of the world. I don't want it on my car, and they made me do it. The Pro models are not offered without it. And I think the great humor in the whole thing is that the new 4Runner has come out, and the new 4Runner TRD Pro also has camo seats, but not camo fenders. Someone somewhere was like, we took this too far. And so I am stuck with camo fenders, but the 4Runner is not very annoying. And by the way, a lot of people have asked me, well, why don't you just wrap them? I can't wrap them because they are textured, and you can't wrap textured surface. Why don't you just paint them? Same deal. I'd have to fill the whole fender and then paint it. And that's kind of more investment than I want. I'd rather just complain. Oh, and then people say, well, why don't you just replace them with the non-camo fenders of other Sequoia models? You can't, because the TRD Pro is wider, and so it has marker lights in the fenders, front and rear, orange in front, red in back. The other Sequoias do not have that. So they are not the same part number. They are not interchangeable. You would have to poke holes for the fender lights. And again, I'm not going to put that level of effort in. The other issues that I have with the Sequoia are all pretty minor. For example, the trunk lock button. This is a Toyota issue in general. In every other car, you want to lock the cargo area. You press the trunk lock button on the tailgate, and it goes down and it locks. In the Toyota, you press the button and then it beeps, and you have to do something with the key fob. And I don't really get how it all works. And I'm sure I could read about it in the owner's manual, but why isn't it just obvious? Like, I push the button, it goes down, it locks. That's how it should work. But Toyota is a company that is too ruled by like caution and conservatism and attorneys, and they're afraid to just have a simple thing like that be like that. So that's not how it works in my car. I also am annoyed by the gauge cluster screen. The cluster screen is adjustable on the left and the right. The left screen lets you see the music, the fuel economy, the range, all that stuff. But the right screen only lets you see like your turbo boost gauge and your like off-road incline meter, like showing how. And it's like, what if I want to see music on one side and like a map, or music and the trip odometer? I can't do that. It's music, trip odometer, map, and then on the other side, turbo boost gauge, which nobody cares about in an SUV like that. It's idiotic, and Toyota has improved their gauge cluster screen on newer models, and unfortunately, it didn't make it into the Sequoia. I'm sure it will for 25 or 26, but not yet. So generally speaking, there's some complaints, a lot of which relate to it just being a big truck-based SUV, but given my parameters, that's what I was going to end up with, and that's just sort of the reality. And it does an okay job kind of mitigating it. The ride quality is fine. The fuel economy I'll accept. Like, you have to put up with that stuff if this is the kind of vehicle you want. But in the interest of providing a fair and balanced pros and cons take, that's what you got. Now, I will say one other thing. In a recent podcast, I mentioned my strategy for avoiding the police on these long road trips was to remove my front license plate. Because when you have a front license plate and you drive through the American Southwest and then the Southeast, you are an out-of-stater, because none of those states, from New Mexico all the way to Virginia, from Arizona all the way to Virginia, none of them have front plates except Texas. And the general rule in those states is that they all hate Texans and Californians, which I am. And so I remove the front license plate at the Arizona border, and I don't put it back on until the Virginia border, because I want to seem like I'm a local, and I feel like Highway Patrol is less likely to pull over a local going over the speed limit. And I must say, for the very first time driving across the country from Southern California, Massachusetts, I've done this drive 9 times now. For the very first time, removing the front license plate the whole way, I did not get stopped. I didn't change my driving behavior. I did nothing differently, but it seems like that's a pretty good idea that works. Police can't instantly tell that I'm from California. And so I mentioned that on a podcast, just wanted to give an update on how it went. But that's the Sequoia. Overall, I'm very happy with it. Personally, I wouldn't recommend it. Like, my needs for a car were very limited. I needed to seat as many people as possible. I got 7 seats. I'd love to have 13. I needed off-road capability. I needed great self-driving technology. These are things that most people are not trying to combine into one car. If you are, great. I found the car for you. But if not, then don't buy one of these, because you're going to not like the fuel economy, the physical overall size. the ride quality is not great. But if you, for some reason, need to combine great driver assist tech and off-road capability and a ton of seats in one car, I think this is the best one. The other vehicles that are constantly mentioned to me as something I should have bought simply do not hit all three of those categories like the Sequoia does. It certainly has its drawbacks, but I would say it has the least drawbacks of any of the vehicles that I could have bought. So that's my Sequoia update after finally having actually driven it, and I'll let you know how it goes when I drive 3,300 miles back across the country later this fall.